Oh, it's a miracle! Great. These things are horribly uncomfortable, actually, so I do prefer them. However, we now have sound, so I'll not faff around any longer. Good morning. So today, thank you. Today we are starting a new theme. Keith loves a theme, and so we're on a new theme. Having thought about fruit on the front line, we are now looking at time. Now, time has become one of life's most precious commodities. In a world where everything seems to be going faster, instant messages, fast food, next day deliveries, it seems like we're all dedicated to getting things done at the quickest speed possible. You don't need me to tell you that the world feels like it's getting faster. And yet somehow we don't seem to have gained any more time at all. We still hear the phrase, "There's just not enough hours in the day." Personally, I can't think of anything worse than more hours being added to my day. It would just mean more time to worry about all the things that I've not done. But for many of us, time pressures are real issues. As we seek to squeeze all the aspects, all the commitments, all the things we need to do into days and into our weeks. Over the next few Sundays, we'll be looking at the topic of time prayerfully, considering how we use our time. So it's my job to kick off the theme with today's subject entitled Time with God. I thought it'd be useful to look at why it's important to spend time with God. Life already has so many expectations. Why is time with God something that we need to prioritise? I also thought it'd be worth thinking about how we actually do that. We're told God is always with us. How do we be particularly intentional about our time with God? I've chosen the passage from Mark to help us this morning. Let's read it together. Mark 6, starting at verse 30. The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so the disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said. "It's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we going to spend that much on bread and give it to them eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida. while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. This passage starts with Jesus encouraging his disciples to take time out to rest. They've shared all kinds of stories about their ministry tour. And what are the documented words that Jesus said? Let's get away from these crowds and rest. They've been busy. Jesus tells them it's important to take time out. I wonder if there's any of us gathered here who need to hear Jesus saying to us, take time out, come with me and rest. So even for the disciples who were not burdened by the curse of the smartphone, it turns out that drawing away and being still and at rest was not an easy thing to do. They are spotted by the crowds, leaving by boat. And as their boat reaches the shore, there's the crowd waiting for them. It almost feels like some paparazzi pursuit you might find of the latest celebrity trying to find some privacy from the media. When I first read these verses, I could almost hear Jesus sighing. Here we go. And yet, not surprisingly, Jesus is filled with compassion as he saw these sheep with no shepherd. He took time to teach them and then lead on to the famous miracle, which many of us will have heard many times. After this amazing miracle, we read Jesus made his disciples get back in the boat and head out on the water, while Jesus cleared the crowds before heading to the hills by himself to pray. As we consider our title, Time with God, we see that Jesus shows us a clear example throughout the Gospels that he values time alone with God. And if Jesus, the Son of God, needs to spend time alone with the Father, how much more do we? For us today, it's great to come to church, to have focused time in our week with friends and family, joining together, singing and praying as one. But our relationship with God has got to be something we pursue all week. Just as I would never spend time with my husband only if we were in a crowd, or if I only met up with my closest friends when others were around. God desires that our relationship with him be something deeper, more intimate. Let me make this really clear. Time with God is a wonderful thing. It's something that we benefit from. It brings strength, breathes life, it heals and it restores. I don't imagine after doing the miracle, Jesus says, I suppose I better go spend time with God. He'll be expecting me. Jesus was desperate to be in the presence of the Father. His soul was longing for time with God. Why would we not want to spend time with God? But I think if we're being completely honest, for many of us, it really is hard. I was at a conference on Thursday where Keith was doing some teaching, and one of the sessions was entitled, Having a Rule of Life. It was about how God should be priority, as much of a priority as brushing our teeth at the end of the day. To start the session off, we explored some of the reasons why time with God can be a struggle for us. I wonder if any of you can relate to any of these. Too busy, demands on time, spiritually low, lack of routine. There was a big long list on an A-board, all the barriers which stopped us spending time with God. I wonder what the barriers are in your life that makes time with God difficult. As I looked at the list that the group had come up with, I realised that none of them were actually very good excuses. It just didn't quite cut it, the things that we were coming up with. I remember seeing a film, a comedy, called He's Just Not That Into You. The point of the film was, if somebody is really interested in you, then they will make time. When I first started dating Richard, I'd just arranged a mission trip to China for 4 months. I couldn't believe it. I'd been single for so long, then I meet this interesting person, and China, 4 months, really? Couldn't believe it. On our second date, things were going well, we were chatting, and I admitted that I was actually going to be leaving really soon to go to China. I couldn't have doubted Richard's interest, as not long after he informed me he'd bought tickets to come and visit me when I was over in China. He got some serious brownie points for doing that. We make time and we take effort for the things that are important. I wonder if when you were a new Christian, it was all new and exciting, reading the Bible for the first time, illuminated as you read it. Spending time with Jesus didn't feel like a chore. But for those of us who have been a Christian a while, it's really easy to get complacent. Well, I chat with God all the time. When I'm on the bus, when I drop the kids off and walk home from school, I go to church every Sunday. Do I really need to spend time with God that we see Jesus showing in our Bible passage? Yes, 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 and yes. Jesus models for us a drawing away, a connection in solitude that was about him gaining strength that he needed for the task ahead. This wasn't about a demanding God, demanding time from us. This was about him being restored. Can I also briefly mention that Jesus went to the mountain to pray? Mountains are closely associated in the Bible with the presence of God. Location can help us. Keith has mentioned, you may remember, I've heard it a few times, Keith got a chair for Christmas. He was very pleased with his Christmas chair. And I also have a chair. Only this is not a new chair. This is a very old, brown monstrosity of a chair, which I call my prayer chair. There's a sense as soon as I sit on it, I'm ready for action. I'm ready to connect with God. Find a room, find a seat, find a space that works for you. Location was important enough to be mentioned in Mark. It's worth for us taking time to consider it too. So, why do we need to take time to spend with God? Because it blesses us. Jesus' example shows us it's important. We need time with God just as we need food and drink. We need spiritual nourishment. There is a reason Jesus calls himself the bread of life and offers us a water which means we will never be thirsty. We spend time with God because it's important. When we do, miracles happen. What could possibly be more important than connecting with the creator of the universe, the one that flung stars into space? How on earth could reading the paper or watching the telly take priority? Why spend time with God? We'd be mad not to. Having considered our gospel passage, where we see the example of Jesus spending time with God, I'd now like for us to reflect on a psalm, Psalm 46, verse 10, as we think about how we spend time with God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. It almost feels good just saying it. Now, for some of us, being still is quite tricky. I speak from experience. As we're thinking about the how, I thought it would be useful to think about our different personalities and how this can impact the time that we spend with God. Spending time with God is about spiritually renewing our batteries, and we can all vary in the ways that we recharge. I wonder who among us is an introvert and who is an extrovert. These terms were popularised by the psychiatrist Carl Jung, and you may have come across them if you've ever done a Myers-Briggs personality test, which is often used in the business sector to promote a positive working environment. I love these kinds of tests. I find them really enlightening. They help me understand myself, but they also help me understand other people. Being an introvert or an extrovert is not about how quiet or outgoing you are, but rather about how you renew your energy, how you recharge. Now, while I do enjoy being on my own, I am in fact an extrovert. No huge shocks there, I'm sure you're thinking. People really energise me. I feel recharged after meaningful conversations. I love connecting with people. A couple of years ago, after about 8 years of marriage, I made a very important discovery. I discovered that my husband, who has the ability to chat to almost anybody, is, in fact, an introvert. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. He renews his battery by drawing away from people. It was a proper light bulb moment. This is why he's always complaining when I have people round at the house all the time. This is why he can never understand why on a day off I arrange every hour meeting somebody new for coffee. It seemed so obvious and made so much sense. For some of us, the thought of drawing away to a place of solitude fills us with dread. I remember as a teenager being encouraged to have a quiet time with God every day. A quiet time? Why can't I have a noisy time with God? Time alone drains me. How can solitude renew me? However, even for the most high-end extroverts, time alone with the Father is vital. It doesn't necessarily have to be quiet, but Jesus shows us very clearly that while it's good to connect with God in the midst of a crowd, there has to be more than that. I remember reading in a book about a Christian who took a year out to draw close to God. He went to live in solitude in a cave. What a complete waste of time that is, I thought to myself. I mean, who benefits from that? How self-indulgent, I thought. God really challenged me that I was wrong. Dwelling in the presence of God is not a passive activity. It's great for us to remember that our faith is about action. We've been thinking about that in Fruits in the Front Line. But that action is to be born out of a place of quiet and a place of prayer. Once I was at a YWAM conference in Lyon in France, and there was a group of nuns sharing the conference space. You could tell these women hung out with Jesus. You could see it in their faces. You could sense it. They were magnetic. Although I felt a bit nervous when they passed me, I wanted to be near them. I wonder if you know anybody like that. There was a programme on the telly called The Big Silence. It was based in a monastery, and it followed 5 people from very different walks of life, and it documented them on a silent retreat. At the start, they admitted their fear of silence. They confessed the efforts that they went to avoid that place of quiet, to fill their lives with noise. It was so powerful to see the way that over the weeks, God spoke to every single one of them in that place of silence. When all the distractions had been moved, God was able to break into their lives. It's a challenge. Do I create space for silence in my day? As an extrovert, my energy may be renewed by people, but is my spirit renewed? I was at a prayer meeting in a wee church in Westerhales called City Life. There was a speaker there from New Zealand called James Jordan. He was preaching, and at the end he came round and prayed with every single one of us gathered. He was an international speaker, still is, and here he was in a room with a bunch of teenagers speaking about the Father heart of God, praying with each one of these teenagers with the same dignity and intent as if they'd been church leaders or missionaries. He was praying along the rows, and I looked over and saw him at the end of my row. He was giving a word to each person that he prayed for. As he approached, I attempted to pull my most earnest, prayerful face as he stood in front of me. He cupped my head in his hands, and he said the words, "Stop running." It was James Jordan that said those words, but I heard the voice of the Father. "Be still and know that I am God." As we think about the how we spend time with God, it's really very, very simple. We slow down. We put our phones away. We be still. And we stop running. Life for many of us is full of demands, full of time pressures. In Sweden recently, we went to a famous competition in Stockholm where they have an annual gingerbread competition where the design has to follow a theme. The smell when you walked in was amazing. The theme for 2018 was the word luxury. And what struck us was how many contributors used the theme of time as being a luxury. How full our lives have become that time is now a luxury. One of the things that really strikes me about Jesus is I never see him in a hurry. He only had 3 years to fulfill God's plan, but he still knew that he needed to draw back, to spend time with God, time to be still. It's a really important topic that we're looking at today. Time with God is vital. Why? Because it was modelled by Jesus, and if he needs it, then I'm pretty sure we do too. How? By being still and slowing down. Where will we make time for God in the week ahead? Keith challenged us a few weeks ago to take £3 and to do something for God. I'd like to challenge us to take 30 minutes in solitude, without your phone, with God. Now, apparently, there are 10,080 minutes in a week. What might happen if we gave God 30 of them? What would happen if we took time to be still? Maybe we could ask a friend to help keep us accountable. Jesus thinks you're great. He is longing for time with you. Who knows what will happen if we set that aside for him? Let's pray. Father, each one of us has been given 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Father, I pray that you would help each one of us to make space in our time for you. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, not just out of habit, but because meeting with you transforms us. Would each one of us know your transforming power? In Jesus' name, amen.